This story sounds like fiction, but was heard and recorded by me from a casual acquaintance whom I met in one of the bars when I was on vacation in the Dominican Republic. Whether it's true or not is up to you. So here we go. Blood Cemetery. I live in a small but lively town in the state of Massachusetts. More precisely, before this, I lived and worked in a large metropolitan area in the state, in Boston, and worked for a major IT company specializing in various software developments in different fields. However, the noisy city and hustle and bustle were apparently not my element. Despite the financial attractiveness of my previous job, I decided to leave the noisy and energetic city for this quiet place compared to Boston and other metropolises. And as it turned out, I did not make a mistake. This small town was saturated with mystery and mysterious myths, from stories about ghosts to tales of residents being abducted by aliens. Its local legends fueled my love for the paranormal. This theme fascinated me throughout my conscious life. As long as I can remember, I have always been interested in unusual things and phenomena. I loved reading. My library was dominated by books by Stephen King, J.K. Rowling, J.R.R. Tolkien, as well as authors of science fiction such as Ray Bradbury, Asimov, and many others. However, the theme of mysticism, witchcraft, and myths attracted me much more. Perhaps that's why, combined with insomnia, this passion not only made me read books on this topic avidly, but also wander at night through the strangest and darkest places in the city. In Boston, this once almost cost me my life when I wandered into a very dangerous neighborhood, Roxbury. By some miracle, I managed to escape from a group of local thugs, whom a police car accidentally scared away when it entered these slums. But since my current place of residence could not boast the presence of aggressive locals, I, with a calm heart, once again surrendered to my former passion. I started spending many nights strolling through the deserted streets of the city, and on one of these walks I ended up at the nearby cemetery. This discovery pleased me greatly, and hoping to see something unusual here, something like ghosts or spirits, I began to come here regularly. These walks were fruitless, devoid of any activity, supernatural or otherwise. My secret desire to sneak a peek at what would come next eventually faded, but I continued to visit the graves. It was a place where I could gather my thoughts when sleep eluded me. However, one night, luck smiled at me. It was a dark spring evening. I was bored, unable to sleep as I wasn't used to going to bed early, and my work as a programmer today was minimal, so I finished it earlier than usual. Realizing that I had a couple of free hours, I decided to take a walk and do something outdoors. As usual, my legs took me towards the local cemetery. It was as if it was beckoning and calling me. Sometimes I even felt tempted to set up camp there and sleep among the dead. Knowing that this would provoke disapproval and possibly an unhealthy attitude, I refrained from doing so. Wandering among the graves, I read inscriptions on tombstones, often imagining and fantasizing about the lives of these deceased people. Engrossed in this activity, I didn't notice how quickly time passed. It was already quite late, and I, slightly tired by the end of the night, decided to stroll along the graves one last time, trying to thoroughly tire out my legs before heading home. And then suddenly, I noticed something. There was light in the caretaker's hut behind the cemetery. It was not like him to work so late. It wouldn't have been something out of the ordinary, except for the huge, yawning hole nearby, very large even for several graves. It was unusual, and it was fortunate that I noticed it before stumbling into it. Intrigued by this discovery, I approached the hut, sneaking up to the broken window on the side. What I saw was strange and frightening at the same time. Inside, about a dozen peculiar individuals in tattered black shrouds were participating in an improvised feast. The main dish was an oily red stew with a horrifying smell that permeated everything around the room and the surrounding space around the cottage. I could barely contain the nauseating spasms choking my throat, and only fear of being discovered kept me suppressing the urge to vomit. The men sitting behind a large wooden table wrinkled their faces as they brought this strange stew to their lips, except for three, a tall man at the end of the table and two others sitting next to him. When the feast ended, this tall figure stood up and addressed the room. "Hello, newcomers. I hope you enjoyed dinner." He spoke with a firm voice that echoed throughout the cabin, making everyone listen intently. "Now that our stomachs are full, Michael will explain the rules of your upcoming trial." I listened, holding my breath. It seemed that everyone inside the hut was members of some religious sect. Thoughts swirled and tangled in my head. I'd seen something similar somewhere or read about it. I couldn't remember where. And suddenly it hit me. It was just like in the movie Red Lights. I think that was the name of the film. I watched it about 10 years ago, which is probably why I didn't remember it right away. The trial mentioned by the tall man was something akin to medieval gladiatorial sports used for candidate selection. With fear and growing curiosity, I listened as Michael explained the upcoming trial and the rules of this strange game. 2 teams were to spread out on opposite sides of the cemetery, each consisting of 4 people. 3 blood runners and 1 blood baron. Initiates would be the runners, and the henchmen of the tall man would act as barons. Another participant needed to be discussed. The tall man himself. He was the keeper of blood. Although he wasn't part of any team, he was the most crucial aspect of the game. He guarded and protected what he called the blood. I thought it referred to the red amulet hanging around the keeper's neck, as he tightly gripped it every time the word blood was mentioned. The runner's task was to retrieve the blood from the keeper. Barons acted as advisors, observing each team and assisting where necessary. After Michael finished his narrative, the keeper of blood began to speak. "In every wound, there is blood. In every drop of blood, there is solace. Without death, there can be no light." After these words, he approached a massive cupboard and opened its doors. Before the eyes of everyone present, a woman bound by hands and feet, with a gag in her mouth, was revealed. Her face was pale and she looked barely alive. She opened her eyes, and her emaciated face contorted in a grimace of horror. Her body began to convulse, trying to free itself from the tight restraints binding her. I was paralyzed with fear and shock. What I saw was not a game or a movie plot. It was real, and I became a witness to a genuine cult ritual. The first thoughts that crossed my mind were to scream at them to stop. The second, to run. However, fear gripped my throat, and my legs wouldn't obey me. While I stood in shock under the window, unsure of what to do, the horrific spectacle continued inside. The keeper of blood continued. "The light of blood can only be seen after death." With these words, he pulled out a large red dagger from under his cloak, seized the woman, and thrust it into her abdomen. I watched in horror as the unfortunate victim's head slumped, and life began to leave the tortured woman's body. Without waiting for the woman to die, this maniac in a hood struck the victim again in the chest and swiftly slashed her throat. 2 of his henchmen immediately placed a large black bowl under the gushing stream of crimson blood. As soon as the bowl was filled with the blood of the innocent victim, the keeper threw the body to the floor. Stepping over it, he approached the table, where he and his assistants skillfully poured the contents of the bowl into 3 large glass containers, sealing them with unusual stoppers attached to them by metal chains. So, this is what the runners will be hunting for. It was blood, not an amulet. This is all the blood I can offer. This gives, at most, 3 of you the chance to become blood projectors. And remember, you are being watched. Those who choose to refuse need to be eliminated. The same goes for any stranger you encounter. Bodies should be thrown into the pit. Merciful God, I was really in danger. That's why there was a nearby pit, an ideal place for a communal grave. You must stop at nothing to get one of these vials. All others will be sacrificed. Your bloodlust must be as strong as your desire to live. The cultists left the hut to begin the game. I, as quietly as I could, rushed to hide behind the trees, into the wooded part of the cemetery, and concealed myself behind a large tree, not wanting to end up like that poor woman. I just needed a loophole to escape unnoticed. Peering out from behind the tree trunk, I saw a runner kneeling in front of a grave with closed eyes. I assumed it was a mandatory requirement before the game started. The voice of the Keeper of Blood echoed through the trees before I could do anything to save myself. My survival still hung by a thread. Using the moonlit puddle of water at my feet as a reflective surface, I watched as Michael and 3 runners devised a strategy just 10 yards from my position. My heart pounded so loudly that I feared they would hear its thumping. Between the beating in my chest and the conspiratorial whispers filling the forest, my ears were consumed by an unsettling symphony of torment. Just when I could no longer bear another second, silence cut through the fresh night air like the Keeper's dagger plunged into that woman's body. A chill ran down my spine, and the betraying sticky sweat of fear broke out on my forehead. In the puddle's reflection, there were no figures in cloaks. No one was there. Everyone seemed to have dissolved into the darkness. Peeking out from behind the tree, I confirmed that no one was there and took my first uncertain steps towards the woods. Get to the forest. That's my chance. Looking into the distance, I saw a tomb by the main road, perhaps 100 yards away from me. It would be the perfect cover for escaping to the city, but I couldn't make it there unnoticed. The cemetery was surrounded by a forest, so darting from tree to tree would increase my chances of survival. Taking a deep breath, I steadied myself. Without a second thought, I sprinted to the next tree along the path to a safe spot and hid. Then I caught my breath and looked around. No black cloaks were in sight. I ran to the next tree and scanned the area again. It seemed clear. No one was in sight. As I was about to make a dash for my next hiding spot, panic suddenly seized me. My legs inexplicably lifted off the solid ground. Blood froze in my veins as some invisible force lifted me into the air, and I tumbled upside down. The next thing I remember is being hoisted and placed on a tree branch. There, I was met by the frightening sight of my abductor, one of the blood runners. I didn't scream or try to escape. It would be futile. I sat there in horror and exhaled what I thought would be my last breath. However, instead of gutting me, the man spoke. "What's your name?" he asked. I was too shaken to answer. "Never mind, who are you anyway?" This time he spoke more clearly with a slight English accent. "Listen, I noticed you over there by the window, eavesdropping. If I wanted you dead, I could have killed you then. I want you to help me." "Help you?" I asked. "Yes. I'm going to use you to my advantage. I understand you know what we're doing here, and you know the rules of the game. Do you?" I nodded slowly, still trembling. "Good. With you, I might be able to switch the roles and gain the upper hand." I was frightened, but calmed down enough to focus on the runner's plan. "See that tomb over there? That's where the Keeper of Blood is. I need you to approach the mausoleum and slowly open the door. The Keeper of Blood will undoubtedly go after you. Just as he's about to end your life, I'll attack and finish him." "But why?" I asked. "Isn't this part of the game?" "You're right. You don't need to worry about why. Just know that if you don't do as I say, I'll kill you myself. Now go." He gave me his cloak for protection and pushed me off the tree. I didn't want to risk facing the Keeper of Blood head-on, but I also didn't want to die at the hands of the runner. My fear of death kept me from refusing. I had to go back to where I had just escaped from. Darting from tree to tree, I eventually reached my destination. In the air hung the smell of death and bloodshed. While the runners fought for control of the field, I stood pressed against the cold, old stone, trying to calm myself. My desire to escape intensified. The main road was within reach, but the thought of running away quickly faded. I thought the Englishman, or rather now without his cloak, would catch me and dispose of me effortlessly. If he could climb a tree and haul my body onto it without making a single sound, it was clear he possessed monstrous strength, agility, and stealth, essential to catching me off guard during a chaotic run over the hills. I sighed helplessly, knowing that, one way or another, I would probably die this night. Summoning all the courage I had left, I circled around the massive communal grave and approached the door. My trembling hands reached for the rusty handle and pulled it toward me. Before the hinges could even creak, The door swung open, pushed from the inside. A force knocked me off my feet, and my head struck the hard ground. The rest became a blur. The Keeper of Blood loomed over me, half of his body in shadow, the other bathed in moonlight. The vision of death appeared here to take my life, and the blood from my frantically pounding heart. My eyes closed for a moment, only to open again to see another figure. In my stunned state, I couldn't make out who was who, but one attacked the other, completely overpowering him. The defeated one fell to his knees, and before collapsing face first into the cold cemetery soil, the familiar sound of metal meeting flesh rang in the air. All I wished for at that moment was for the one killed to be the Keeper of Blood. Otherwise, I had no chance. Before understanding who the victor was and who was defeated, consciousness left me, and I sank into oblivion. "Hey, are you okay?" When I came to, I heard the voice of an old man. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes to see who it was. The cemetery caretaker stood over me, holding a lantern to my face. "What? How? Where are they?" "Where are who?" he asked. "You don't understand. I was supposed to be dead." The cemetery caretaker stared at me in confusion, but then smiled. "Come on, you'll catch a cold out here." The caretaker, whose name was Pete, invited me into his shack. He prepared some food and gave me a warm blanket to wrap around myself. I was very grateful and needed someone to listen to me, even though I knew it would all sound like nonsense. I didn't describe the men by names, but Pete seemed to know who I was talking about. "Sounds like you had a run-in with the Keeper of Blood." "That's him. How did you know?" "His spirit has been haunting these lands for over 100 years, I suppose." His spirit. Unbelievable. All of this was surreal. I always thought I wanted to experience it for myself. Pete and I talked for a long time. He knew all about the Blood Runners and their heinous deeds. Apparently, they were a sadistic cult formed in the 1800s that terrorized the local community. Each initiation of the Blood Runners brought more disappearances. They used the cemetery as a venue for their rituals, burying victims at the end of each night. After all, who would look for bodies in a cemetery? Over 50 people fell victim to the Blood Runners before their sinister games were halted. During their final rampage, an Englishman infiltrated their ranks and killed the Keeper of Blood, seeking revenge for his wife's death, which occurred during one of the bloody rituals. Soon after his death, all his followers began repenting, claiming they were under the control of the Keeper's amulet. They said he possessed supernatural abilities, but no such amulet was ever found. After Pete explained everything, I sat in reverent fear, stunned by these revelations and what had happened to me. Was I reliving that fateful night? Or had I traveled through time to help this man achieve his goal? Perhaps I would never know what happened on that fateful night, but one thing I was sure of. I would never wander through graveyards at night again, simply because the ghost of the Keeper of Blood was still there, performing his bloody rituals.